The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast NH. I'm Deborah Monk, empowering you to find your creative voice.
I'm Shelly Devlin, inspiring you to find your why.
And today we have awesome Barb, who we remember from last week. She's continuing our series on finding the top 10 mistakes that writers make. Today we're doing number 9, which is notes on stereotypical characters and flat characters. Hoy, there's a big subject.
Oh, I love this subject, though.
You love this
You
subject.
do?
I do. I love character subjects.
Anything about character?
I do. I could talk character forever. And what I found with a lot of, especially beginner authors, but we all do it because deep down we're kind of lazy in some respects as writers. I mean, you're working and it's just a lot of work. All the things I've talked about is a lot of work. We spend a lot of time developing really great primary characters. And then when we get to our secondary characters, we kind of just slot them in there. And I was thinking about this because it applies to nonfiction too, since you ladies write both fiction and nonfiction.
Right.
Your secondary characters exist for a purpose. They're either there to push the story along, or create jealousy, to say the wrong thing maybe, and get the story going, or to illustrate something about the character, to be a mirror reflection,
Right.
Provide wisdom. But they all serve a point. And so you need to have them be as fleshed out as your main characters.
Yeah. I think that when you're writing a memoir, we have a certain opinion on our secondary characters.
Right. I was just about to chop a big section out that had secondary characters in it.
Well, and sometimes you do, because you don't always need
good.
them. I
Okay.
mean, that's one of the things I wrote down is you need to ask yourself, is the character necessary?
Right. And I don't think it is right now. So.
And so there you go.
Okay.
But, saying with the whole secondary characters with memoirs and real people, in life, no one is exactly black or white. So, yes, you have your perception of them, but you know in your head that they're human and that some of the things they did were because they had their own issues. So you flesh them out and make them people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole point is, a friend of mine once said, see them as people, not as story devices.
Yeah. I do. For me personally, in the fiction writing, I'm not really that interested in, I don't really like that many people that much. And
Here.
I mean, that's not really true. The truth is, I like
that
it
personally.
I pretty much like everybody, but when I'm writing, I care about my characters so much that nobody else matters in a way. And a lot of times I'm in my own character's head. And so I find that I often have trouble choosing who else will be important in the story. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, there's there are certain characters, how's the way to put it? Your secondary characters are going to act like the leg of a triangle. You have your main characters and they're connected. Usually you have two, a protagonist, you have your antagonist. The secondary characters are connecting those two. And they provide usually something that one of your characters lacks. Either a wisdom or a sense of cynicism, a sense of humor, a social awkwardness that your other person doesn't have, or maybe it's the other way around. Sherlock Holmes lacked social awareness. He had Dr. Watson as a secondary character to provide that. So while you don't care about them, they serve your character. They're going to provide for your character the things that they need, and when they need them in the story. So if your character needs a break from all the drama, there's your secondary character to do that.
Interesting.
And if you look, there's certain stock characters or archetypes that appear all the time. The best friend, the mother, the villain.
Oh.
Those are all
Okay. Now it's
Sinking in. We're
sinking
starting
in.
to get it.
It's sinking in.
Yeah.
right.
Sinking in.
Yeah. So they represent a certain quality or value, and they push the protagonist along on their journey in some way.
Okay.
And your job now is to take those stock characters that appear all the time and make them real characters. There's a lot of temptation to just go right on the surface and not spend a lot of time on them, which is why you end up with stereotypes. You end up with the sassy best friend, the guy crazy best friend, the psychopathic killer.
Which at the end of the day is fairly boring.
Well, they're boring, and the reason they're boring is because people know them. They don't. It's nothing fresh.
Right. Well, I came up with a few examples of ways that I think that it would be easy to make it more interesting or to switch it. So if you let's say you have a politician's wife and she finds out he's cheating on her. That's a little cliche. You think about the good wife, that's certainly it's been done a million times. What if you made the woman the politician and she finds out her husband's cheating on her? Because that's a very different example. So instead of seeing the scorned woman as the woman who's standing behind the politician doing the stupid wave, now suddenly she's the one at the podium and he's the one in the back, and she has to. So it changes the dynamics completely.
It does, but that's more plot oriented much as. I mean, when you're talking about secondary characters, I'm talking about like the best friend that comes in when your friend is crying over a pregnancy test.
Right.
What is that best friend's point? Why is that person there? And what is their personality going to be? And it's so easy to slide into the simple, easy thing to do. Oh, well, she's going to be the funny best friend that comes in and tells a joke and brings me an extra foamy latte and makes everything all right. But, let's look a little
Except
deeper.
Deb loves that in real life, so
Sure.
she's looking for that.
But a lot of books.
Applications being accepted.
That's what appears in a lot of books. So why not dig a little deeper and find out more about your best friend? Maybe your best friend's the one that's suffering from fertility issues and has never been able to have a child.
Right.
And you're afraid to tell her you're pregnant. And like, oh my God, I'm really
That's
scared.
in my
'cause I'm
book,
pregnant.
actually. That's in Well-Behaved Woman Coming Undone.
Well, there you go.
Nice job.
Shameless plug.
Look at
Good
that.
for me.
Oh, look at that.
Shameful plug.
Well, and then the other thing is, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about secondary characters and stereotypes is because stereotypes, if they're repeated often enough, they kind of become the norm in thinking.
Yeah.
So it can have a very negative connotation, particularly if you're talking about marginalized characters.
Right.
Like the fabulous gay party planner,
Gotcha.
the sassy black friend. Now it's suddenly, even if it's just a quick scene and you have the black crack addict, well, it's sticking in people's head, black crack addict, black crack addict. And that's unfair to a whole population, first off, that you've reduced them to a stereotype.
Right.
And the same thing with the party planner. When I did Secrets, the suburbs have secrets, I went to great pains to create, I have a gay character in it, who is a football-loving, coffee-loving billionaire.
And every woman in town wants him.
Every woman and every man. He's beautiful.
Right.
And but he's
Which makes him a lot more interesting.
Do you have any pictures of this dude?
But it is. I mean, when you first meet him, and she says, "Did you hear something?" He goes, "It was 4th and 1." Do you really think I was paying attention? I mean, he
comes across very
he's
manly.
not just manly. He's a person who just happens to be gay.
Right.
Being gay is not a
Define him.
character defining trait. It's just something he is. So that's why I was saying you think about the person. And the other reason is when you do foreign characters, they can become very cliched. Comical characters can be very cliched.
Right.
And you need
That's why those are so hard to do. It's hard to write humor because you can't go with just the obvious always.
No, exactly.
And I think that's why I have so many voices in my head that I don't tend to need secondary characters. There's conversations going on. Let's see.
I think I took two of my main characters and made them a secondary character in a memoir.
That's okay.
I don't think it's okay because
I mean, I haven't read the book.
because that was a it leaves them an emotionally vulnerable kind of thing, and it's a memoir.
It doesn't represent them well because it doesn't give you the full picture, and so you either have to add more or take some out.
I need to chop them out.
Yeah,
because they need to have it's a memoir.
That's true. And if
they
don't
go through your family list and be like, all right, did I put this one in? Did I put this one in? Did I put this one in?
That's actually
who's
though,
going to be pissed
that's
off that
one
I
of the
didn't put
questions.
them in?
Sometimes you can take secondary characters, and you might, in fiction especially, will have these huge casts of characters, and you have to ask yourself, could I merge two of these characters together and make them serve the same point? Do they really need to be in it? You can overpopulate your...
Plus, Shelly, you could tell any of the family members you skip over that they're going to be in the second run, right?
She's very true.
Part 2, which gives you 10 to 15 years before you have to show any work.
Well, and with the memoir, it's 2 years. It's your story. So it should only be secondary characters that directly impact your story.
I'm not saying they should be chopped out. They should just be put in a different light. They can
There you
still
go.
be a secondary character to that story, but
it can't be the only light that shows
having them sit by a bedside when someone's passing versus have them part of the controversy of the person that was passing.
I see what you mean.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
Could you merge two of those characters, even though it's a memoir and it's based on the truth?
There are people that do that.
Could you just take both first names, make one of them a last name, and have
like A-Rod
There are
and
people
J-Lo.
who say I've merged some characters.
Mad mom and dad.
Oh my God, that's good.
I mean, I think it tends to be more when historical fiction, will do that.
Right.
They'll take two people and turn it into one person that represents all those people who are doing stuff. So you could do that, but then it stops being a memoir and it goes more to historical fiction.
No, and I've told everybody I'm not changing any name in book 1. Book 2, their names will change because then those are the
Some of them.
affairs
them?
and addiction and all that other
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
None
kinda
of
psyched
her
for book
books.
2.
shit just got real?
None
Yeah.
of her books
Damn.
will be super. They'll be also. I was going to say none will be super light, but that's not quite right. They'll be
Right.
light, but they'll also be very heavy. Like that's one of the
Exactly.
things about
Yeah.
Shelley. She's such a good balance of
We'll throw some sarcasm in, but it's pretty heavy.
the sarcasm is heavy. That's true. So tell me, here's my second example, and tell me if this worked better. But I have a feeling it didn't. So let's say, and I'm going to use it. Pretend it's me. My best friend tells me she's having trouble conceiving, and that her husband won't get checked, but they both really want kids. So she's planning to sneak and get IVF and not tell him that it's not really his baby. But they're happily married and they both want kids. Now, does it change it? My thought is, well, okay, that's not that interesting.
That's very interesting. She's going to have IVF and not tell him.
Well,
Yeah. And why won't he go get tested? What's his problem?
well, I thought, wouldn't it be more interesting if the husband was my twin? So now my best friend who happens to be my sister-in-law as well, is telling me she's planning to.
Well, that's more of a plot thing. What I'm talking about is human characteristics for making your secondary characters human. That's all plot stuff, and that's great.
Interesting.
But is she still going to be on the page as the sassy best friend who just has one-liners and always says the right thing?
Right.
What's her point in being there? What's the point of her doing the IVF? I mean,
Well, to have a kid.
No.
Well, that's the obvious.
Thanks for playing, Deborah.
I loved her face. I
did too.
No, that's not it.
That's not what I meant. But what's the point of her in the story? She has to serve. The secondary characters exist for your character.
They're
Even if
lifting
you're
up
writing,
the primary character.
Exactly. So, and they exist to further the plot. And, it all goes back to your character's arc, which we've talked about, I think, every single episode, where they start in one place and they go to the end.
The hero's journey.
The hero's journey. Those characters are there to help them along the journey somehow. Now, is the best friend going through IVF, the reflective character? It's showing, if that's her point. But then give her human characteristics beyond best friend who wants to have a baby.
So
Make her as real as Shelly,
how
or
do
any
wanna
of your
have a
best
baby.
friends. And one of the ways to do that is,
I don't want to have a baby. I'm done.
and one of the great ways to do that, because they're secondary, you're not going to spend hours giving them a backstory unless you're planning to write a story about them someday, is to think about people and some of the characteristics that they have, and then use those characteristics in your character. Like somebody's laugh, and then, say someone who has a laugh like a hyena. Use that.
Well, maybe you need to explain the difference between how this plays out differently between the main character and the secondary characters.
Ask more what you mean. I
think she did that with the Watson and Holmes example,
That was
where
a good
Holmes
example.
lacks.
That's exactly. They're there to support and provide something your character doesn't have, or to bring them along somehow and teach them something. They serve a purpose in the story. I keep saying it. They serve a role. Your character is the main character. It's their story. So character Deb is going through her story about her marriage and her long
So that
lost.
means Jonathan's a secondary character?
Possibly.
Never.
She likes that.
I like that. But
Write me out right now.
So here's character Deb, and she's going through her story about her childhood and the child she gave up for adoption, and now she's 40, and this child reaches out to her. Right. So there's your Deb's story. So now we have Deb's best friend, Shelly. What's Shelly going to provide in the story? Is Shelly just there to be kind of the comic relief? Is she there to give it the advice that Deb needs to hear when she needs to hear it?
Yeah, pretty much.
To be the mother figure, because Deb doesn't have a mother?
Both. Yeah.
She's not asking you about Shelley for real.
I
It's not a real example.
I was literally just thinking, but wait, Shelly could never be secondary character.
But that's what I mean by you want to make them, and you want to make them human. You don't want her to just come in and be, oh, here, I made you tea. Like, because she's a real living, breathing person. You know, she comes in and she's flustered. Her hair is not combed.
Shelly? Never.
Okay, this is fake Shelly. But Shelly might come in and be...
So basically the story is about Deb.
Right.
So
these people are just kind of window dressing to help her, you know, the people who help her on her journey. But you want to make them not all the same. You don't want every book to have your best friend be the snarky, sardonic best friend from the romantic comedy. You want them to have some real characteristics. She can be snarky and she can be the sardonic best friend, but she always wears mismatched clothes, or she's smoking like a chimney, or smells like cigarettes, but I don't let her smoke in my house, but I know she's doing weed in her car. You know, like something like that. Shelley's going, oh, yeah, that sounds...
Yeah. But I think I have a feeling I'm going to go home tonight and look at...
You're not sleeping tonight, I can tell already.
No, I'm going to go look at Well-Behaved Woman. I don't think I have secondary characters. The only secondary character I had was the husband.
The therapist.
Oh, I loved her. And she was in Julia Stone, too. Oh,
right.
So she's secondary. Finally, light dawns over Marble.
Right. She's there to provide the wisdom that Julia needs.
I see. And I did make her interesting.
Right. Because what you want to do when you're creating these characters, all I'm saying is dig a little deeper. Do not automatically say, okay, you know what? They're going to be going someplace and they're going to run into a bunch of drug addicts. I will make the woman that comes up to him be a black woman.
Right.
You know, make her be a fat, overweight white woman. You know, just don't fall for the stereotypes. Go a little deeper with every character. And do you even need the drug addict? You know, like there'll be people who like to write funny scenes. Do you need that comic relief scene with the diner owner making stupid conversation? Did it really serve a point?
Is this character germane to the story?
Perfect.
2 shows in a row. Okay. Vocab words over here from the producer.
Good for you, Jonathan.
Clearly, Jonathan has been listening.
Gets it, yes. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully this will help you so that your secondary characters are not stereotypical or flat. If you want to hear this episode or share it with a friend, send them to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. That's UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. You can find this podcast and the vodcast, that's video on demand, in case you want to watch it. Find this episode and all previous episodes on the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv, and please subscribe.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.